Today is Monday, August 25th. We're talking about the National Guard being deployed around the U.S. Which city is likely next? Also, what's expected to happen today to the man who was mistakenly deported months ago? Plus, why the government is taking a stake in a tech giant. How a chain restaurant's new logo is sparking backlash. And what's more important, money or love? It's a question younger generations are answering differently. Those stories and even more news to know coming up. Welcome to The Newsworthy. All the day's news in around 10 minutes. Fast, fair, fun, and on the go. I'm Erica Mandy. Thanks so much for being here. You ready? Let's do this. President Trump's anti-crime crackdown is expanding once again. For starters, in Washington, D.C., National Guard troops started carrying weapons last night, marking a change from their original orders. Still, the White House says the troops' mission is the same, to protect federal assets and make things safer for officers making arrests. Meanwhile, the U.S. military is getting ready to go to Chicago. As the Washington Post reports, military officials are sketching out a plan now that's likely to include at least a few thousand members of the National Guard deployed as soon as next month. They've apparently even talked about the possibility of using active duty forces, too. Democratic Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker criticized the plan, accusing President Trump of just trying to create chaos. He says the effort would be unwelcome and unwarranted. Similarly to Washington, D.C., Chicago saw a spike in violent crime during the COVID-19 pandemic, but rates have come down since. In fact, several other major cities had higher homicide rates than Chicago last year, including St. Louis, Detroit, and Baltimore. On that note, President Trump wrote on social media just last night that he wants to send troops to Baltimore soon, too. And he raised the possibility of taking back the federal assistance that is meant to help rebuild the Francis Scott Key Bridge that collapsed when a cargo ship hit it last year. As expected, Maryland's Democratic Governor Wes Moore criticized the idea, accusing Trump of wanting to live in blissful ignorance in the face of declining crime rates. Moore invited Trump to join him on a public safety walk instead, and to that, Trump said he would, quote, much prefer that he clean up this crime disaster before I go there for a walk. The back and forth continued from there. By the way, the Trump administration has given the National Guard another new mission. The White House says Guard troops are being activated in 19 states in the coming weeks to help with immigration enforcement. To be continued. Remember the man mistakenly deported from the U.S. to a notorious El Salvadoran prison? Well, now that man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, is back with his family in Maryland. He was released from criminal custody on Friday, and the plan was for him to be monitored through a GPS ankle bracelet until his trial. But he's not expecting to be free for long. Abrego Garcia's lawyer says he expects his client to be detained by immigration officials again today. Apparently, Abrego Garcia turned down a plea deal that would have had him deported to Costa Rica, where he would have been given citizenship if he were to plead guilty to human smuggling charges. That stems from a traffic stop back in 2022 when he was pulled over with 8 passengers in his car. At the time, police suspected smuggling, but Abrego Garcia was not charged. Well, since turning down the plea deal, immigration officials told his lawyers over the weekend they plan to deport him to Uganda instead. The Trump administration still says Abrego Garcia is a threat with ties to the MS-13 gang. Abrego Garcia says he has no affiliation. To be continued. It appears one of President Trump's former advisors turned critics is now under federal investigation. FBI agents spent hours on Friday searching the home and office of John Bolton, who served as Trump's national security advisor during his first term. News outlets like the New York Times cite sources who say the investigation is over accusations that Bolton leaked sensitive national security information to the news media in an effort to damage Trump. At this point, Bolton has not been arrested and is not charged with any crimes. But Trump did terminate his security clearance and Secret Service detail. Separately, the Trump administration fired the Defense Intelligence Agency director, who's now become the latest in a long line of senior national security officials to lose their jobs this year. This one is noteworthy since Lieutenant General Jeffrey Cruz was responsible for the preliminary report on the military strikes against Iran. And at the time, the report prompted backlash from the Trump administration, since it said the strikes only set back Iran's nuclear program by a matter of months, even though President Trump said Iran's facilities were obliterated. Either way, the Pentagon has not given an official reason for that firing. Gaza City and the surrounding areas are officially suffering from famine. At least that's what United Nations-backed food security experts say. The group put out a report saying at least 500,000 people in the Gaza City area are facing the most severe conditions that it measures. And with rare exceptions, the rest of Gaza's population is also struggling with severe hunger, with hunger-related deaths rising all throughout the Strip. But Israel disputes the report, saying it does not take into account recent efforts to address this crisis. For example, Israel has been letting more trucks with humanitarian goods enter Gaza. Israel also blames the severity of the hunger crisis on the terror group Hamas, which has refused to lay down its arms and positions itself in civilian areas. Humanitarian agencies do back up Israel's account that the flow of food and other supplies has gotten better lately, but they say the supplies are still far short of what's needed, while the war just keeps ramping up. Well, back in the U.S., thousands of Americans are under evacuation orders and warnings in the face of growing wildfires. One fire has burned through at least 10 square miles of the Northern California wine country, and as of early this morning, it's only 11% contained. Meanwhile, in Central Oregon, the so-called Flat Fire has grown to be about 29 square miles, and thousands of homes there are also facing evacuation notices. Some have already burned. Firefighters are working to stay on top of the flames, but low humidity and historically high heat are making it especially difficult. Speaking of which, a dangerous heat wave is continuing in West Coast states, at least through tomorrow. We're talking about the temperatures reaching into the triple digits, and overnight lows are staying above normal in places like Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, and Arizona. Several records are expected to be broken. More news still ahead, but first, thanks to our sponsor, Wix.com. Have you ever used a website platform that felt limiting, where you had to stick to the same cookie-cutter template and couldn't really make it your own? That's why Wix.com is different. Wix lets you build without limits. You can use their super smart AI builder to create a site in just minutes, or start with one of more than 2,000 customizable templates and tailor every detail to match your style. Their interface makes it easy and fun. They have drag and drop tools, an AI image studio, and design effects that make your site look polished and professional. For those running a business, Wix has you covered for everything from e-commerce to appointments to services, and it's all built in. No need to juggle add-ons. Wix has been a leader in web tech for almost 20 years now, so you know you're using a platform that's tried, trusted, and constantly innovating. Ready to create your own website? Go to Wix.com. That's Wix.com to start building your website today. Thanks to Wix for sponsoring our show. Now, back to the news. Pretty soon, there will be fewer brightly colored street crossings meant to celebrate LGBTQ+ pride. Several Florida cities have been told to get rid of them in the coming days. There was backlash over the weekend when a Florida transportation crew painted over the memorial crosswalk that's outside Pulse nightclub in Orlando, where dozens of people were killed back in 2016. Orlando's mayor called it a cruel political act. But Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says the state is actually protecting roads from being used for political purposes. The Federal Transportation Department actually sent letters to all 50 governors earlier this year saying any roadway markings or political messages that are not directly related to pedestrian or driver safety need to go. Some local leaders have refused. Others around the country are expected to follow suit. The U.S. Justice Department released hundreds of pages of transcripts and audio files from interviews with Jeffrey Epstein's longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. There were no big bombshells, but they still upset some people. For example, family members of a prominent Epstein accuser who died by suicide say they're outraged that the DOJ gave Maxwell an undeserved platform to rewrite history, even after she was convicted for child sex trafficking. In the transcripts, Maxwell said she never saw any man in Epstein's orbit act inappropriately with a woman of any age. She specifically praised President Trump, saying he was, quote, a gentleman in all respects. Maxwell's lawyers are still pushing for Trump to grant her a pardon, saying she's innocent. Already, she's been moved to a lower security prison. The U.S. government has agreed to invest about $9 billion into the American chip maker Intel. Specifically, the Trump administration agreed to buy more than 433 million primary shares of Intel common stock. And with that, the U.S. will get a 10% stake in the company. But it will not have any board representation. The government also agreed to vote with the company's board on matters that need shareholder approval. This is all highly unusual, and some Republicans criticize the plan as violating free market principles. But the Trump administration says it's just making sure the government gets something in return for making an investment. The Trump administration also recently announced a deal to let chipmakers NVIDIA and AMD export high-tech chips to China if the U.S. government gets 15% of the revenue. A chain restaurant is facing growing backlash over its new logo. Cracker Barrel's design used to include a drawing of a man in overalls leaning against a barrel. Now, that's gone, and the logo just features the chain's name, for the first time since 1977. Many conservative lawmakers and media figures took issue with the rebrand, saying it takes away all the Southern country charm that's a touchstone of American culture. They called it woke and told their followers not to eat there. Cracker Barrel responded to say that even though the logo has changed, the heart and soul of the company has not, and that the logo just works better across digital platforms, billboards, and roadside signs. Either way, shares of Cracker Barrel have now plunged, and the chain plans to roll out even more changes like restaurant redesigns later this year. Anyone who placed a bet on Tommy Fleetwood to win the PGA's Tour Championship is probably waking up much richer today. It was actually the first PGA Tour victory for the English golfer, whereas world's #1 golfer Scottie Scheffler had trouble from the start yesterday and ended up coming in a three-way tie for 4th place. Fleetwood acknowledged that he didn't even think he'd win and that no one else did either. But he was resilient, collecting the FedEx Cup and $10 million for winning. Meanwhile, the final Grand Slam tennis tournament of the year kicked off over the weekend. All of the sport's biggest stars are in New York for the U.S. Open, including 5 American women and 2 American men seated in the top 10. The tournament runs through September 7th. You can watch matches on ESPN and ABC. That's it for the main news, so now it's time for Money Monday, when we talk about one interesting money-related news story. But first, this episode is sponsored by Hiya Health. As a parent, I love when something that's good for my kid is also something he's excited about. My 4-year-old takes Hiya's vitamins and probiotics every day. He loves the taste, and I love that he's getting nutrition without all the junk. Most kids' vitamins are basically candy in disguise, but Hiya is different. They're made with 0 sugar, 0 gummy additives, and packed with 15 essential vitamins and minerals, plus a blend of organic fruits and veggies. Plus, they're vegan, dairy-free, allergy-free, and third-party tested, so I know they're safe. And if you're tired of battling with your kids to eat their greens, Hiya now has Kids Daily Greens Plus Superfoods, a chocolate-flavored greens powder designed specifically for kids, packed with more than 55 whole food ingredients to support brain power, development, and digestion. Just scoop, shake, and sip with milk or any non-dairy beverage for a delicious and nutritious boost your kids will actually enjoy. And we've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. You can receive 50% off your first order. That's half off. To claim this deal, you must go to hiyahealth.com/newsworthy. This deal is not available on their regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com/newsworthy and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. Now, back to Money Monday. It turns out love does have a limit and a minimum salary. A new survey from matchmaking service Talkify found Americans, on average, expect their ideal partner to earn 6 figures, even though the median U.S. yearly salary is closer to $62,000. If forced to decide between love and money, nearly half of the people who responded said they'd pick the money, and nearly 1 in 3 said they'd consider getting back with an ex if that person became wealthy. But Talkify's chief matchmaker says it's not as shallow as it sounds, that wealth can signify security and ambition, and that people are considering what kind of lifestyle they want in the future. By the way, there were clear distinctions in responses depending on the person's age. Gen Xers were most likely to say they choose money over love, followed by Gen Z. But millennials were most likely to choose love, saying they'd rather have a broken magical relationship than a lackluster, financially secure one. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for your support of the show. We'll be back with even more news to know tomorrow. For now, have a great day.